The call came in the middle of the night, but he didn't pick up. A small boy stood in a quiet room, holding a phone with trembling hands, listening to it ring. On the other side of that call was his father, a powerful man, a man who could save lives with just one command. But at that moment, he was not thinking about his family. He was lying in bed, holding another woman.
Daddy! Please! Please save Mommy!
Daddy, please, the boy whispered into the phone, his voice shaking. Please save Mummy. The call kept ringing and ringing and ringing, but no one answered. Behind him, his mother cried out in pain, a sound no child should ever hear, a sound that made his small body freeze, not knowing what to do or who to call. He turned slowly, looking at her, lying there, struggling, fading. Mummy, I'm here, his voice broke as he moved closer. I'm here, don't worry. He pressed the phone tighter to his ear, still hoping, still waiting.
Dad, please answer the phone. Mom needs help, she's hurting really bad. Please come quick.
But the call ended, and in that moment, something inside him quietly changed, because the one person who was supposed to come didn't. What happens when a child calls for help, and the only person who can save his mother chooses not to answer? This is the story of a boy, a mother fighting to live, and a man who picked the wrong moment to stay away. Welcome to Afro-Korean Diaries. If you're new here, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the intense dramatic stories we release every day. Turn on notifications, because this story is only just beginning. And trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Now, let's go back to our story. The storm came in fast that night. No warning, no slow build. Just one moment the sky was gray and heavy, and the next, the rain was hitting the mansion windows like it had something to prove. Inside, the house was quiet in the way that big, expensive houses get quiet when they're empty of the only thing that makes them worth anything: people. Cynthia Okoye Kwan was alone. Not technically alone. There were staff quarters somewhere in the East Wing, a security booth at the front gate, a housekeeper who came and went like a ghost. But in the way that mattered, in the way a woman knows when no one in a building actually cares whether she lives or dies, she was completely alone. She was on the floor of the master bedroom, back pressed against the side of the bed, one hand gripping the edge of the mattress so hard her knuckles had gone pale. The other hand was pressed flat against her stomach. Her breathing was wrong, too shallow, too fast. The contractions had started 3 hours ago, and she told herself it was early, told herself to wait, told herself he would call back. He hadn't called back. Min Jun! Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. She hated how small it sounded. Min Jun, come here. The little boy appeared in the doorway like he'd been standing just outside it, waiting. He probably had been. He was 5 years old and already had the quiet watchfulness of someone much older. Dark eyes that missed nothing. A serious little face that looked so much like his father's, it sometimes made Cynthia's chest ache in ways she couldn't explain to anyone. He looked at her now, on the floor, pale under her dark skin, sweat beading at her temples. And she watched his face do something complicated. He was scared, but he was holding it together for her. That almost broke her more than the pain did. Mummy. He crossed the room quickly and crouched beside her, his small hand finding her arm. "Does it hurt a lot?" "It hurts," she admitted, because she'd promised him she'd never lie. "But I need you to do something for me, okay? Can you be brave?" "I'm already being brave," he said simply. She almost laughed. Almost. "I need you to call Daddy." The boy went still. Not the stillness of a child who didn't understand. The stillness of one who understood too well. He'd called twice already in the last hour. The phone had rung out both times, and Min Jun had stood there holding the phone with that careful, blank expression children get when they're learning for the first time that adults can disappoint you. "What if he doesn't pick up again?" he asked quietly. Cynthia closed her eyes through another wave of pain, breathed through it, opened them. "Then leave a message. Tell him. Tell him it's serious this time. Tell him Mummy said so." Min Jun looked at her for a moment longer than a 5-year-old should need to look at his mother before deciding to trust her. Then he nodded, stood up, and picked up the phone from the nightstand. 40 minutes away, in a high-rise, expensive apartment, Do-yoon Kwon was not thinking about his wife. He was lying on his back in a room that smelled of expensive perfume and bad decisions. One arm behind his head, eyes on the ceiling. Seo Rina was beside him, her hair fanned out across the pillow, one finger drawing slow patterns on his chest like she owned it. She probably believed she did. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. He glanced at the screen without moving his head. Cynthia calling. He looked at it for 3 full seconds. Then he turned his gaze back to the ceiling and let it ring. Rina smiled without looking at the phone. She already knew. She always knew. "Leave it," she said softly, and it wasn't a request. It was a confirmation of what he'd already decided. The buzzing stopped. A few seconds of silence. Then it buzzed again, shorter this time. A voicemail notification. He didn't move. Rina shifted closer, said something low near his ear, and he was already half forgetting that the phone had buzzed at all. That was when the second call came in. Not from Cynthia's number this time. The screen lit up with a name that was saved as 3 small characters in Korean. Min Jun. Do-yoon's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Rina felt it. She felt everything. But she said nothing, just watched him. He let it ring. 4 rings, 5, 6. And then it went to voicemail, and the room was quiet again, except for the rain against the windows and the distant sound of the city below. What Do-yoon did not do, could not bring himself to do, or perhaps simply chose not to do, was press play on that voicemail. Not right then. Not with Rina's eyes on him, and the night still stretching ahead, and the particular coldness he'd spent years perfecting, still sitting in his chest like concrete. So he didn't hear it. He didn't hear his son's voice, small and steady and trying so hard not to shake. "Daddy, it's me, Min Jun." He didn't hear the way the boy paused, the way you could hear him choosing words carefully, the way Cynthia had taught him to. "Mummy is crying. I don't think she wants me to see, but I can hear her." Another pause, longer. "She told me to tell you it's serious. She said to tell you she said so." And then quieter, the part that was no longer a message from a mother passing instructions through a child, but just a boy, alone in a big house with the storm outside and his mother on the floor. "Daddy, I'm scared too. Please come." The voicemail ended. And in that apartment 40 minutes away, Do-yoon Kwon stared at the ceiling and felt nothing. Or told himself he felt nothing. Which, if you've ever tried it, you'll know is a different thing entirely. To understand why Cynthia was on that floor alone, you have to go back, not far back, not to her childhood or her mother's kitchen or the Lagos street she grew up on, where the noise never really stopped and everyone knew everyone, and loneliness was practically impossible. That life feels like it belonged to a different woman entirely. Go back just 6 years. Go back to the day she landed in Seoul with 2 suitcases, a passport full of hope, and a husband who met her at the airport with a driver and a nod. Not a hug, a nod. She'd told herself it was cultural. She'd read about it, actually. Korean men, especially men of a certain status, weren't demonstrative in public. She'd prepared for that. She was a practical woman, Cynthia. She prepared for things. She'd spent 6 months before the wedding studying Korean phrases, learning the etiquette, reading about the food and the customs and the way households like the Kwans operated. She had prepared for the bowing and the formality and the expectation of silence. What she had not prepared for was the way the staff looked at her. Not with hostility. That would have been easier to name. It was something quieter than that. Something that lived in the half-second delay before they responded to her requests, in the way they looked just past her shoulder when she spoke, in the way the housekeeper, Mrs. Yoon, would confirm instructions with Do Yoon's assistant before acting on anything Cynthia said, even when it was something as simple as requesting a different brand of tea. She noticed all of it. She said nothing. That first week, she unpacked her suitcases into a wardrobe the size of her entire childhood bedroom, placed her mother's photograph on the nightstand, and sat on the edge of the enormous bed in the enormous room of the enormous house, and breathed through the specific terror of realizing that wealth and belonging are not the same thing, that you can live inside something beautiful and still feel like a visitor. Do Yoon came home late that first night, and the second. By the third night, Cynthia had stopped listening for the sound of the front door. The marriage had been her father's idea. That was the truth she carried quietly, the one she never said aloud because saying it felt like diminishing herself. Chief Emeka Okoye was a proud man, proud in the way that men who have built things from nothing are proud, with a particular blindness to the cost their ambitions extracted from the people around them. He had met Do Yoon Kwon 2 years before the wedding, during a period when Do Yoon's empire was tangled in an African distribution deal that had gone badly wrong. Her father had untangled it, quietly, efficiently, at considerable personal risk. Do Yoon had not forgotten. The marriage, when it was proposed, was framed as an honor, an alliance between families. Her father had presented it to Cynthia over dinner, as though he was offering her something extraordinary, and she had sat across the table from him and searched his face for doubt and found none. She had been 26. She had seen Do Yoon's photograph. She had done what young women with practical hearts and quietly romantic souls sometimes do. She had looked at a stranger's face and decided there was something worth hoping for in it. She had said yes. She understood later, of course, understood that to Do Yoon, the marriage was a settlement, a debt paid in a form her father had requested. There was no courtship because there had been no pursuit. No pursuit because there had been no wanting. She was not chosen. She was allocated. But here was the thing about Cynthia that the staff and the mother-in-law, and eventually even Do Yoon himself, underestimated. She was not brittle. She did not shatter easily. She had grown up watching her mother build a life out of whatever material was available, had absorbed that particular resilience through years of watching a woman refuse to be diminished, And so, when the coldness of the Kwan household settled around her like a second skin, she did not collapse into it. She decided to build something anyway. She hired a private Korean tutor without telling anyone and practiced in the mornings before the house woke up. She learned the names of all the staff and used them, even when they didn't use hers. She learned Do-yoon's schedule and had dinner ready on the rare evenings he came home at a reasonable hour, not because she was performing submission, but because she was genuinely trying, and she didn't yet know how to try quietly. He noticed. She could tell he noticed. He would pause, sometimes, in the doorway of the dining room and look at the table she'd set, and something would move across his face too quickly for her to read before he sat down and became distant again. They ate together in silence, mostly. Occasionally, she would ask him something about his work, about his day, about the city, and he would answer in the minimal number of words required to constitute a response. Not rude, never rude, just unreachable. She told herself it was early. She told herself people opened slowly. She told herself that a man who had lived behind glass his whole life couldn't be expected to let someone in overnight. She told herself a lot of things in those first months. Min-jun was born on a Tuesday, and that was the first day Cynthia saw Do-yoon Kwan look at something like he meant it. He held the baby with both hands, carefully, the way you hold something you're terrified of dropping, and he looked down at that small Korean face, because Min-jun came out looking entirely like his father, not a trace of Cynthia's features in him, which would become its own quiet grief later. And for a moment, just a moment, the glass cracked. Min-jun, Do-yoon said softly, naming him without discussion, like it had already been decided. Cynthia, exhausted and aching and watching from the hospital bed, felt hope move through her like warm water. She should have noticed that he hadn't looked at her once. Min-jun learned to walk in a house that didn't clap for him. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't. There is something specific that happens to a child's understanding of the world in those early years. Every milestone, every first, gets measured against the room's reaction. He took his first steps on a Saturday afternoon in the main living room, lurching forward with that particular drunk sailor confidence of a toddler who doesn't yet know falling is something to fear. And Cynthia had burst into tears and scooped him up and laughed and cried at the same time, the way mothers do when joy becomes too large for one expression. Do-yoon was not home. He was rarely home for the small things. He showed up for the large ones, the first birthday, the first day of school, events that could be photographed and noted and filed under the category of things a present father does. But the in-between moments, the unremarkable Tuesday afternoons, where a child first discovers he can move through the world on his own 2 feet, those happened without him, and Cynthia collected them all quietly, storing them in a part of herself she stopped offering to share. Min-jun grew, and as he grew, he watched. Children who grow up in houses with emotional weather learn to read it early. They become small meteorologists of mood, scanning faces the way other people scan skies, always calculating the chance of storm. By the time Min-jun was 3, he could tell the difference between the silence that meant his father was simply busy and the silence that meant something heavier was sitting in the room that nobody was naming. He didn't have words for any of it yet. He just had his eyes. And his eyes were very good. Back in the house, Min-jun adjusted his position on the bed, sitting closer to his mother. The rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it was louder now, like the night itself refused to be quiet. "Mummy, I called him again. He swallowed. He didn't pick up, but I left a message. He gently rubbed her hand with his thumb, trying to comfort her, the way she used to comfort him. You said messages are important, so he will hear it. A pause. His voice softened. Right? Cynthia didn't respond. Her breathing was uneven, weak. Min-jun leaned closer, his small face tightening with worry. Mummy, stay with me, okay? 3.5 years ago, on a faithful Sunday, Min-jun asked a question that stopped Cynthia mid-step. She had been carrying a tray of tea things from the kitchen toward the sitting room, and Min-jun had been trailing her the way small children trail their mothers, one hand loosely gripping the back of her dress, chattering about something involving a cartoon character whose name Cynthia could never remember correctly. They passed the entrance hallway where 2 of the household staff, the younger ones, the ones who had been hired in the last year, were standing, and as Do-yoon came down the main staircase, both of them bowed immediately, deeply, the practiced deference of people who understood the hierarchy of the house perfectly. Cynthia walked past with her tray. Neither of them moved. Min-jun stopped walking. He looked at the staff. He looked at his mother's back. He looked at his father descending the stairs. He was putting something together behind those dark eyes, assembling pieces with the slow, serious effort of a child who wants to get it right before he speaks. Mummy, he said, when they were in the sitting room and she was setting down the tray. Why do they bow to Daddy when he walks in? A pause, the careful pause of a child choosing words. But not to you? Cynthia set down the teapot. She stood very still for a moment, her back to him, and did the thing she had become skilled at. The rapid internal rearrangement, the quiet composing of a face that would give him an answer without giving him a weight he was too small to carry. She turned around and crouched to his level. Different people get greeted different ways, she said gently. It doesn't mean anything bad. Min-jun looked at her with those eyes, his father's eyes, her heart, and she could tell he wasn't fully satisfied with the answer. But he nodded and climbed onto the sofa and went back to his cartoon, and Cynthia stayed crouched for a second longer than necessary, her hand on his knee, her face carefully neutral. That night she sat in the bathroom with the door locked and the tap running, and allowed herself exactly 4 minutes of crying. Then she washed her face, dried it, and went to bed. She had become very good at timed grief. Rina didn't arrive dramatically. That was the thing about her. She had no interest in drama, because drama drew attention, and attention invited scrutiny, and Seo Rina had not gotten where she was by being scrutinized. She arrived the way dangerous things often do, gradually and then all at once. Cynthia first heard the name at one of the quarterly dinners Do-yoon hosted for his inner circle. Events she was expected to attend and not participate in, to sit at the far end of a long table and be decorative and silent in the way expensive things are silent. She had gotten good at those evenings. She dressed carefully, spoke when spoken to, smiled with the precise warmth of a woman who has learned to perform comfort she no longer feels. That night, one of the men, older, loud in the way powerful men who don't need to prove anything, sometimes inexplicably are, had leaned toward Do-yoon midway through the meal and said something low, and Do-yoon had responded in Korean too fast and too quiet for Cynthia's still developing ear to catch. But she caught the name, Rin-ah, and she caught the way the man smiled after Do-yoon said it. A specific kind of smile. The kind that lives between men who share an understanding they have no intention of examining too closely. Cynthia had looked down at her plate and eaten the next 3 bites of food without tasting any of them. She told herself she didn't know. For months, she told herself that. She was good at it by then, telling herself careful, manageable versions of things, building small walls between what she suspected and what she was willing to confirm. It was a survival strategy. She wasn't naive. She was protecting herself the only way available to her, which was refusing to look directly at something she couldn't yet afford to see. But Min Jun had no such walls. He was 4 years old the afternoon he wandered into his father's home office, looking for a misplaced toy, and found Do-yoon on a call. Not a business call, though the door was almost closed, though the voice was low. Min Jun had pushed the door open with the oblivious confidence of a child in his own home, and stopped when he saw his father's face. Do-yoon saw him, ended the call, said nothing. But Min Jun had seen the expression that was on his father's face before the mask came back down. He didn't have a word for it. He wouldn't for years. But later, when he was older and had more language for the landscape of adult feeling, he would remember that moment and name what he'd seen. His father had looked soft, just for a second, soft in a way Min Jun had never seen him look at his mother. He picked up his toy from the corner of the room and left quietly. That night at dinner, he watched his parents across the table, his mother asking his father something small, his father answering with the minimum, and he felt something shift in him, something he couldn't name yet, something that felt a lot like the beginning of understanding. Back in the present, Min Jun shifted slightly. He adjusted the blanket over Cynthia again, making sure it covered her properly. "I think you're cold." His voice was gentle, careful, like he was afraid she might disappear if he spoke too loudly. "You always cover me when I'm sick." He paused. "So I will cover you too." He covered her and wiped her forehead with his sleeve, just like he had seen somewhere before. "They said, when someone is in pain, you should talk to them." He leaned closer to her ear. "So I'll talk." A small, broken smile formed on his lips. "You always say I talk too much." A tiny laugh escaped him, but it didn't last. He paused for a moment and wiped his eyes quickly with the back of his hand. He didn't even realize he had started crying. "Mummy, do you remember when you said I speak well?" A small pause. "You said Daddy would be proud." His voice dropped. "Do you think he's proud of me?" Silence. Only the rain answered again. As time passed, Cynthia discovered her husband was cheating herself. She heard it with her own ears. She was standing outside a door she had no reason to believe was a door she needed to avoid. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Do-yoon had come home earlier than usual, early enough that Cynthia had felt the small, embarrassing flutter of hope she hadn't fully managed to kill yet, the one that still rose in her chest on the rare. Occasions the house felt like it might become something other than what it was. She had been upstairs with Min Jun, helping him with the Korean reading exercises his school had sent home, when she heard voices on the lower floor. Do-yoon's voice, and another one, a call on speaker, she assumed, or a visitor she hadn't been informed of. She came halfway down the staircase before she heard it clearly enough to stop. The other voice was a woman's, low, composed, unhurried. The voice of someone completely at ease in a space. Cynthia stood on the 5th step from the bottom and listened to her husband speak to another woman with a warmth she had spent 6 years trying to earn and never received. She couldn't make out every word. She caught pieces, a name, a reference to dinner, a laugh from Do-yoon that she recognized immediately because she had heard it so rarely and cataloged it so carefully, the way you catalog things you want but can't reliably access. And then, in a pause between whatever was being discussed, she heard Do-yoon say it in Korean, low, almost casual, the way you say things you've said so many times they've stopped feeling significant. 그녀는 내가 선택한 사람이 아니었어. She was never my choice. Cynthia's Korean by then was good. Not perfect, but good enough. Good enough to stand on the fifth step from the bottom of her own staircase and understand, with complete clarity, that her husband was telling another woman what he actually thought of the person he had come home to every night for 6 years. She didn't move for a long time. Behind her, upstairs, Min-jun called out, "Mummy, I finished the page." She turned around and went back up. She didn't confront him. People always want to know why. Why she didn't walk down those last 5 steps and open that door and demand to be seen. And the answer is complicated in the way real answers usually are. Part of it was pride. The specific, quiet pride of a woman who refuses to perform her own humiliation. Part of it was strategy. She understood, instinctively, that a confrontation on his terms, in his house, surrounded by his staff and his structures, was a confrontation she would lose. And part of it, the part she was least willing to examine, was that she already knew, had known for some time. And as long as she hadn't confirmed it out loud, there was still a shape to her life here, still a framework, still Min-jun's father under the same roof, still something that could, in certain lights, be called a family. So she swallowed it, added it to the collection of things she had swallowed, and she went back upstairs and sat beside her son and looked at his Korean reading exercises and said, "Good job, that was the hard page," and meant it. Min-jun looked up at her face with those careful eyes. "Mummy, are you okay?" "I'm okay," she said. He looked at her for 1 second longer than necessary. Then he turned back to his page. He was 4 years old and already knew when she was lying. She both loved and hated that about him. 3 weeks after that Thursday, Min-jun met Rina for the first time. It happened the way things that shouldn't happen tend to happen. Through a miscalculation, a crossed schedule, a moment where the careful separateness Do-yoon maintained between the compartments of his life briefly and catastrophically collapsed. He had brought Rina to the house, for reasons Cynthia was never given and stopped wanting. On an afternoon he had believed, incorrectly, that Cynthia had taken Min-jun to his cousin's birthday party across the city. They had come home early. Traffic had been bad going out, and Min-jun had complained of a headache, and Cynthia had made the decision to turn around without texting anyone because she hadn't thought she needed to. She walked in through the side entrance, Min-jun's hand in hers, and heard voices in the main sitting room. She stopped. Min-jun didn't. He pulled his hand from hers with the easy freedom of a child in his own home and rounded the corner before she could call him back, and she heard the voices stop, and then she heard her son say, in the bright, curious tone of a child who has not yet learned that some questions shouldn't be asked out loud, "Daddy, who is that lady?" Cynthia walked in slowly. Rina was standing near the window, composed in the way of someone who has prepared for this possibility and decided in advance not to be rattled by it. She was beautiful in the particular way of women who have weaponized their beauty. Deliberately, consciously, every element calibrated. She looked at Cynthia with an expression that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite an apology, and was, Cynthia understood immediately, a declaration. Do-yoon stood between them, saying nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Min-jun looked from his father to the woman, to his mother, and his. Back again. He was doing the meteorology, reading the weather. Then he looked at Rina again and asked, with the crushing precision only a child can achieve, "Are you Daddy's friend, or are you my new mummy?" The room went very still. Rina looked at Do-yoon. Do-yoon looked at the floor. Cynthia looked at her son, this boy with his father's face and her soul, and felt something that had been bending in her for 3 years, finally, quietly, snap. Not loudly, not with tears or shouting. It just went, like a thread pulled past its limit, silent and permanent. "Come, Min-jun," she said, her voice completely level. "You need to rest your headache." She took his hand and walked out of the room and up the stairs and did not look back once. After that, she stopped waiting. She stopped setting the table for 2 on the evenings Do-yoon was home. Stopped leaving the light on in the hallway when she went to bed. Stopped trying to catch his eye across rooms. She didn't do it with anger. Anger would have required energy she had decided to spend elsewhere. She did it with the quiet, careful approach of a woman who has finally accepted the dimensions of the space she's been given and decided to stop trying to make it larger. She poured everything into Min-jun, and Min-jun, who felt the shift without being told about it, poured everything into her right back. They built something in that cold house, the 2 of them, mother and son, something small and warm and entirely their own. Movie nights on the floor of his bedroom with blankets pulled into a fort. Morning walks in the garden before the staff arrived. A private language of jokes and gestures and shorthand that belonged only to them. It wasn't what she had come here for, but it was real. And in a house full of beautiful, expensive, hollow things, real was everything. Which is why, on the night the storm came, and the pain started, and the phone rang out twice into silence, it was Min-jun who stayed. It was always going to be Min-jun. He was 5 now, and the headache was back, not his, hers. And the baby was coming too early, and the house was too quiet, and the rain was too loud, and he was the only one there. He filled a cup of water from the bathroom tap, carefully, with both hands, walking back to her slowly so it wouldn't spill. He set it on the floor beside her and held his mother's hand tighter. He picked the phone and called his father again, no response. He left a voicemail. His voice was barely audible now. "Daddy, you said timing is important." A small pause. "So why are you taking so long?" And somewhere between a child's fear and a man's silence, something precious was slipping away. He turned to his mother with a tired expression and said, "Mummy, I called Daddy again." She opened her eyes. "He didn't answer," he said. And then, because he was his mother's son, "But I left a message." The third voicemail was shorter than the first 2. Min-jun had recorded it standing in the hallway outside the bedroom door, phone pressed to his ear, voice low the way his mother had taught him to speak when something was serious. He didn't cry. That was the thing that would stay with Do-yoon later, in the long, sleepless hours that followed. His son hadn't cried. He had spoken with the careful steadiness of a child who has decided that someone needs to remain calm and has elected himself. "Daddy, it's me again. Mummy isn't talking very much now. She keeps closing her eyes, and I keep waking her up. She told me not to let her sleep. I don't know why, but I'm doing it. The baby is coming, I think. I don't know. Daddy, I don't know what to do. Please come now. Please. The voicemail ended. Do-yoon heard it at 11:47 p.m. He had picked up his phone to check a business message. A reflex, automatic, the way breathing is automatic, and seen the notifications stacked on his screen. 2 missed calls from Min-jun, 2 voicemails, and underneath them, unplayed, the earlier one from Cynthia that he had dismissed without a second thought. He pressed play on the first one. He listened. He pressed play on the second one. The room was quiet around him. Rina had fallen asleep, her breathing slow and even behind him. The city hummed 40 floors below. Everything was exactly as it had been 10 minutes ago, except that something had changed in his chest. Something cold and structural, like a load-bearing wall developing a crack. "Daddy, I don't know what to do." He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. He was not, by any measure, a good man. He had never claimed to be. He had built his empire on decisions that required a certain suspension of conscience, and he had made peace with that long ago in the way men make peace with things they need to continue doing. He had treated Cynthia as a transaction, because it was easier than treating her as a person, and somewhere in the architecture of his coldness, he had genuinely convinced himself that she was fine, that the house and the money and the stability were sufficient, that a woman like her should be grateful for what she had, that his indifference was not the same thing as cruelty. His son's voice had just quietly demolished every wall of that argument. "I keep waking her up. She told me not to let her sleep." He stood up. Rina stirred. "Where are you going?" "Home." A pause. She sat up slowly, and he could feel her recalibrating in the darkness. The slight shift from sleep to strategy that happened so fast with her, it was almost imperceptible. "It's almost midnight." "I know what time it is." "Do-yoon." Her voice was careful, measured, the voice she used when she wanted to sound reasonable while achieving something specific. "Whatever is happening over there, you have staff, you have security. You don't need to. My son called me twice." He picked up his jacket from the chair. "He left 2 voicemails. He's 5 years old, and he's alone in that house, and he's scared." He said it flatly. Not with anger, not with guilt, not yet. Just with the plain arithmetic of it, as though hearing it stated aloud was clarifying something he should have known how to calculate hours ago. Rina looked at him. And then she said the thing she would later realize was the thing that changed everything between them. The sentence that revealed exactly what she was and what she had always been underneath the elegance and the strategy. "If you go now," she said quietly, "you won't come back the same." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said, "I won't." He left. What do you think is going to happen next? Is Do-yoon too late? Will his son ever forget this experience? Will he meet Cynthia in one piece? Tell me what you think in the comments, then like and subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next episode. He drove too fast through rain-slicked streets, the city blurring past the windows, and he did not let himself think. Not about what he might find, not about the hours he had wasted, not about the voicemails sitting on his phone like evidence at a trial he had already lost. Thinking would come later. Right now there was only the distance between where he was and where he needed to be, shrinking with every second, still too large. The gate to the house was open when he arrived. That was the first wrong thing. The gate was always closed after 10. He was out of the car before it fully stopped. The front door was ajar, light from the entrance hall spilling out into the wet dark. He pushed through it. Min-jun. Silence. He moved through the entrance hall, past the staircase, toward the main corridor, and then he stopped. Min-jun was sitting on the floor outside the master bedroom, darker, knees pulled to his chest, head resting back against the wall. The phone was in his lap. He was not asleep. His eyes were open, fixed on the middle distance, watching the hallway with an exhausted vigilance, like a small soldier who had decided his post was here and had not moved from it. When he heard his father's voice, he looked up. He didn't run to him, didn't cry, didn't do any of the things a 5-year-old who has been alone and frightened for hours might reasonably do at the arrival of a parent. He just looked at him with those dark, careful eyes and said, "Daddy, you came." And then, smaller, "She stopped talking a while ago. I kept waking her up, but then she stopped. She stopped waking up." A pause. "I didn't know what else to do, so I just stayed." Do-yoon pushed open the bedroom door. What he saw on the other side of it would live in him for the rest of his life. Cynthia on the floor, barely conscious, her breathing shallow and labored, some evidence of hours of unassisted labor surrounding her in the devastating, unglamorous reality of a body pushed past its limit with no help and no witness except a 5-year-old boy who had done everything he could. He called emergency services with hands that were not entirely steady. He crossed the room and crouched beside her and said her name. Said it the way he hadn't said it in years, without the flatness, without the distance. And her eyes moved, just barely, just enough. "I'm here," he said, and hated himself for the words because he knew, and she knew, and the walls of the room knew that here was the one place he had chosen, repeatedly and deliberately, not to be. The hospital was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't bring peace, only questions. The machines beside her bed made soft, steady sounds. Beep, beep, beep. Cynthia lay there, still, unmoving, like the world had left her behind. Kwon Do-yoon stood at the door for a long time, didn't step in immediately, didn't speak, didn't move. For the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to do. A doctor walked past him slowly, then stopped. "You're her husband?" Do-yoon nodded once. The doctor's eyes held his for a second longer than necessary. Then he spoke. "Your daughter survived." A pause. "But your wife is in a coma." The words didn't land immediately. They didn't crash. They didn't break him. They settled, slowly, like something sinking deep, where it couldn't be removed. If she had gotten help earlier, the doctor hesitated, then finished quietly. This could have been avoided. Silence followed, heavy, unforgiving. The doctor walked away, but his words stayed. Do-yoon finally stepped into the room, each step slower than the last. He looked at her, really looked this time. Her face was pale, tired, too quiet for someone who used to endure so much without complaint. And for the first time, he noticed something he had never paid attention to before. How much she had been carrying. Alone. A small sound came from the corner of the room. Min-jun. He sat quietly on a chair, his small legs not even touching the floor. His eyes were fixed on his mother, like he was still waiting for her to wake up. Do-yoon hesitated, then walked closer. "Min-jun!" The boy didn't answer, didn't even look at him. Do-yoon stopped right in front of him. "You should rest." Still nothing. Then slowly, Min-jun spoke. His voice was soft, calm, but empty in a way that didn't belong to a child. "Daddy." She stopped talking. Do-yoon's chest tightened, just slightly. "I was calling you." A small pause. But you didn't pick up. Silence. Minjun finally looked at him. There were no tears this time. That was what made it worse. You said, when something is important, he swallowed. You should answer quickly. Another pause. Was Mummy not important? The question hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. Do-yoon opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, he had no answer. Minjun looked away again, back at his mother. I told her you would come. His voice dropped. I thought you would come. Do-yoon's hand tightened slightly at his side. Across the room, a soft cry broke the silence. The baby. A nurse gently placed the newborn in a small crib nearby, wrapped carefully, alive, breathing. Do-yoon turned his head slowly, looking at the child, his daughter, so small, so fragile, a life that came into the world. At the exact moment, everything else fell apart. Minjun glanced at the baby, then back at his father. She looks like you too. Another quiet pause. Maybe you will like her more. That line didn't sound like anger. It sounded like understanding. And somehow, that hurt even more. Do-yoon reached into his pocket slowly, pulled out his phone. He stared at it, then pressed play. Daddy, it's me, Minjun. The voice filled the room again. But this time, there was no distance, no distraction. Mummy is crying. Do-yoon's jaw tightened. I'm scared too. His grip on the phone tightened. Please come. The message ended, but this time, it didn't fade. It stayed. Minjun's voice echoed in the silence, over and over again. Do-yoon lowered the phone slowly. Then finally, he sat down. Not like a powerful man, not like someone in control, just a man who realized too late that one call could have changed everything. Minjun's voice came again, soft, almost like a whisper. Daddy, a small pause. Next time, he looked at him. If someone calls you, another pause. Please pick up. Silence. The machines continued their steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Cynthia didn't move, and for the first time in his life, Kwon Do-yoon understood something clearly. Power couldn't fix this. Money couldn't fix this. Time would not go back. But just as the silence settled again, a nurse rushed into the room. Sir, Do-yoon looked up. There's something you need to see. His expression changed slightly. What is it? The nurse hesitated, just for a second, then said quietly, It's about your wife. A pause. Her condition just changed. Do-yoon stood up immediately. Minjun's eyes widened slightly. What happened? The nurse didn't answer immediately. She only said one thing. You should come now. The machines in the room continued, steady, unchanging. But something, somewhere, was shifting. And this time, there would be no missed call. Some mistakes don't shout when they happen. They whisper later, and they never stop. To be continued. What happens next? There is only one way to find out. Like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss out on episode 2 of this intense drama and betrayal stemming from when a child calls for help, and the only person who can save his mother chooses not to answer. Subscribe and stay tuned.